So this is the third time I have the privilege of being together with our wonderful Yarchei Kallah group in Somayach. And the topic we will be discussing today is Kriyas HaTorah. How far back does this mitzvah go? So the fundamental sources in Bava Kama, Pei Beis Amud Aleph, in the first page of our Kuntres, Asoret Tekones Tikkun Ezra. Shiur koyren b'Torah b'Shabbos, v'koyren b'Sheni u'b'Chamishi, v'donen b'Sheni v'Chamishi, 10 tekones. And the first tekon on the list is Shiur koyren b'Torah b'Sheni v'Chamishi. And the Gemara asks, is that tekones Ezra? V'mikora v'mitakne desanya. V'yelchu shloishes yomim b'midbar v'lo motzu mayim. 3 days without Torah. That is something which cannot be. And therefore, Amdu Neviim Shebeinehem V'tiknu Shiur koyren b'Shabbos U'mafsikim b'Yechod b'Shabbos koyren b'Sheni. So Sheni v'Chamishi goes all the way back to the days of the Chumash, to the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. V'yechu shloishes yomim b'midbar b'li mayim. Chazal say ein mayim el Torah, and that is why Neviim shebeneim were metaken that you koyren b'Torah Shabbos Sheni v'Chamishi. There should no 3 days, 3 consecutive days without Talmud Torah. So the Gemara answers yes. Neviim shebeneim all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu was the tekonos Shiur koyren b'Shabbos Sheni v'Chamishi. But Ezra was metaken Sheni v'Chamishi, Klose Gavra, and 10 Pesukim. In the days of Moshe Rabbeinu was either one person, 3 Pesukim, and Ezra solidified. He made this minig more substantial, more central. Klose Gavra, Asora Pesukim, that was the addition of Ezra Asoifer. However, the Yerushalmi seems to have a totally different approach. And the Yerushalmi, which one is it? By me it is Daf Chof Tes Amud Aleph. So in all my Svarim, I quote the Yerushalmi on the Daf, and not only on the Perek and the Mishnah, but now the new Yerushalmi Ois V'Hodor. So the Yerushalmi Vilna is out, and everybody learns Ois V'Hodor, and even the Daf Yomi Shurim in Yerushalmi is all Ois V'Hodor. I cannot go now and redo 40 Svarim and change all the citatot, because I quote Yerushalmi a lot, because since I was very young I've been learning a lot of Yerushalmi. But anyway, so the Yerushalmi seems to have a different opinion, and the Yerushalmi clearly says Moshe Rabbeinu was mataken Kriyas HaTorah Shabbos, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, and Chol HaMoed, but Ezra was the one that was mataken Sheni v'Chamishi. So where is it in our Yerushalmi? It's not here?
No. It's not.
Why not? Oh, but it is, I think, I have my own little pamphlet. So, Daf Chof Tes. Let me see where it is. Well, it's not mine either. So the Yerushalmi says, Ezra Sofer was the one that was mataken Sheni v'Chamishi, unlike the Bavli. So the Yerushalmi has a different interpretation, obviously, in the Psukim v'yechu shloishes yomim b'li mayim. Seems to be a machlokes Bavli Yerushalmi. And Yerushalmi l'shetosoi daf gimel umid beis. Do we have that Yerushalmi in the pamphlet? Second Yerushalmi. So the Yerushalmi, B'nei HaKfura Magdimen L'Yom HaKnisa. Chazal were metaken that the B'nei HaKforim could be Magdim L'Yom HaKnisa. What is Yom HaKnisa? So the B'nei HaKforim could be Magdim to read the Megillah, Yom HaKnisa. That means Sheni v'Chamishi, when people came in anyway. From the little towns to the city, to the big city. Why did they come in? for Kriyas HaTorah Sheni v'Chamishi. And the Yerushalmi asks, well, this doesn't make sense because Kriyas HaTorah Sheni v'Chamishi is Tekonas Ezra. Ezra was later than Mordechai. Mordechai and Esther were before Ezra. So in the days of Mordechai and Esther, when they were Mesak and Mikra Megillah, there was no Kriya B'Sheni v'Chamishi. So obviously the Yerushalmi Lishitosei, because according to the Bavli, the Tikkun of Sheni v'Chamishi goes back to the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Yerushalmi in Megillah Dav Gimel is Lishitosei from Megillah Dav Chavtes, and the Yerushalmi maintains that there was no Kriya Sheni v'Chamishi till the days of Ezra HaSofer.
When you say Moshe Rabbeinu, is it the Seif Arbaim Shana? Because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write the Sefer Torah till the end of the
That is a very good question that the Torah's Chaim asks. The Torah's Chaim was one of the great Gedolei Apshat going back more than 300 years. And the Torah's Chaim says, the loss of the Gemara, Bobakama Pei Beis, Amdu Neviim Shebeinehem. However, the Rambam writes it was Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's have a look at the next source on our sheet. Perek Yud Gimel Aloha Aleph. That is page number 6 in our packet. Moshe Rabbeinu tiken lehem liyasol sheyeh koydem b'Torah b'Rabim b'Shabbos Sheni v'Chamishi b'Shachris. So the Rambam says, who was metakan this takon of Moshe Rabbeinu? But the Torah's Chaim says Neviim Shebeinehem. If it would be Moshe Rabbeinu, would Chazal not mention Moshe Rabbeinu and relate this takona to Stam Neviim Shebeinehem? So the Torah's Chaim says that was after the demise of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was no longer around after Moshe Rabbeinu was buried by a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and the Neviim Shebeinehem were metaken this takona. So let me make a fundamental comment, and that has to do more with, about a year ago I gave a major shiur about the development of Darkei Alimud b'Yisrael. And that's a fascinating topic, Hitpatchut Darkei HaTalmud. And I said that, in the Rishonim, we have everything. In the Ramban, in the Rashba, in the Ritva, you have Pshat, you have Lomdes, you have Halacha. But for hundreds of years, the Derech HaLimed in Yeshivas was Pshat. And the giants of Pshat were the Marsha, the Maram Shif, the Torah's Chaim, and the Marsha almost never mentions the Rambam. He also was not oisik in the other Rishonim, only Gemara Rashi and Tosfos. That's Marsha, that's Maram Eloblin, and that's for hundreds of years. That was the Derech Alimud b'Yisrael. Things have drastically changed. So the Torah's Chaim doesn't quote the Rambam. He just gives Pshat in the Gemara and Bava Kama. And he says, if the Gemara says Neviim Shebeneim or Metak and Sheni v'Chamishi, obviously those were the Leviim that were still around after the Ptira of Moshe Rabbeinu. But he doesn't quote the Rambam. The Rambam clearly says Moshe Rabbeinu Tikkun Lehem Yisrael. Neither does the Marshu ever mention the Rambam or the Maram Shif. So that was the Derech HaLimed in Yeshivas for about 300 years. They focused on Pshat. And the remnant of that Derech HaLimed is one of the greatest admired Svarim of the later Tkufa, and that's the Sfas Emes. So let me say something about the Sfas Emes, which is just a fascinating phenomenon. Many Chassidish Rebbeim were Gedolim b'Torah. Just to mention a few of them, the Shulchan Aruch Harav. One of the greatest poskim in Shulchan Aruch, primarily Orach Chaim, the Mishnah Berurah constantly quotes the Shulchan Aruch Harav. His grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Chidush Arim, the Avnei Nezer, these were Ademorim who were giants in Torah. Most notably, the Divrei Chaim. The Divrei Chaim was considered the Posek Gadol in his days. Sfas Emes. During the lifetime of the Sfas Emes, nobody thought he was a Lamdan. He was a Hasidish Rebbe like all the other Hasidish Rebbeim. He never gave a shir, he never wrote a tshuva. After he passed away, when they printed the Sfas Emes al Shas, the Torah world was shocked. We didn't know there was such a giant amongst us who was not only one of the greatest Rebbeim of his time, but also a giant in Torah. The Sfas Emes learns Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. And you see he's godless because he constantly asks the questions that the Ramban asks and the Rashba asks. And he usually gives the same terutzim as the Ramban and the Rashba and the Ritva. But he doesn't quote Rishonim, very rarely, never quotes Poiskim. So that was a derech halimit. But anyway, so the Toras Chaim argues, if the Gemara says, Neviim shebeneim tiknu, obviously that's not Moshe Rabbeinu, but he didn't see the Rambam. Moshe Rabbeinu tiknu lem nisol she'akoyrim b'toyre b'rabim, Shabbos, Sheni v'chamishi b'shachris, and what was Ezra metakim, ve'ezra tikkun she'akoyrim came b'mincha b'kol Shabbos v'Shabbos, ve'gam hu tikkun she'akoyrim Sheni v'chamishi, shloisha b'nei yodam, v'lo yikro pochas mi'asor psukim. So the Rambam firmly follows the Gemara Bava Kama Pei Beis and ignores the Yerushalmi. So the Yerushalmi in two sources has a different opinion. And the Rambam, as usually, is based on the Bavli, because we pass Halacha in accordance to the Bavli and not in accordance to the Yerushalmi. But the Rambam clearly says it was Moshe Rabbeinu, and that is also the Ritva in Masechet Megillah. The Rambam and the Ritva. I don't have an explanation, so why the Chazal say Neviim Shebeineim and not say Moshe Rabbeinu? Odoin leNeviim, lekodmim lefonav, or leboim achrav. I don't know. And that is what troubled the Toras Chaim, and that's why he suggested that it's not Moshe Rabbeinu, but rather at a later period. Ritva.
There would have been a space in time between the Elchus Shloshis Yomim until the Takana, if it was not the first Yeshua in the Takana.
Yes. Kishahoruch Shlosh Yomim Ben Yimayim, that definitely was way before Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. The question is that an asmachta, or that is actually the story, what it was? And this is the derech of the Rosh Chazal. Maybe V'yercha Shlosh Yomim is just an asmachta and a remez, and not that it actually transpired. So, but according to basic pshat, that proves the Rambam's point, and lo kedivrei HaTorah Chaim. The Ritva is miyashiv. There should not be a stira between Bavli and Yerushalmi at the beginning of Megillah. And the Ritva says, according to the Bavli, Moshe Rabbeinu was mataken Kriyas Sheni v'Chamishi, but Ezra HaSofer was mataken Gimel Gavra v'Asora Psukim. So he says, until Ezra HaSofer, this Kriya was not considered a Choshev Kriya, and that is why the Bnei HaKvorim didn't come into the city to hear the Kriya. Because the Kriya was something that seemed to be so temporary and so not substantial. It was just one person that was Oila, not three, and they just read three little psukim, and that is why the minig of the Bnei HaKvorim to come into the city for Kriyas HaTorah was not noyeg until Ezra HaSofer came, and he gave this Kriya greater importance. Gimel Gavra v'Asora Psukim. So that is the way of the Ritva to reconcile Bavli and Yerushalmi. But it's not miyas of the other Yerushalmi in Daf Chof Tes. And the Ritva only speaks of the Yerushalmi in the beginning of Megillah, but the Yerushalmi in Daf Chof Tes of Megillah clearly says that Ezra HaSofer was the one that was an attack on the entire Kriya, Sheni v'Chamishi, and Moshe Rabbeinu was only an attack in Shabbos Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, and Chol HaMoed. So I don't know. Was the Ritva unaware of the second Yerushalmi? It could be. Maybe he didn't even have that part of the Yerushalmi, because many of the Rishonim didn't have the Yerushalmi, and that is very clear in their Ksovim. So, is Kriyas HaTorah min HaTorah or mid'Rabbanan? Obviously, both according to the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, it is a takana. How do we relate to a takana of Moshe Rabbeinu? Is that min HaTorah or is that mid'Rabbanan? Brochas Daf Yud Gimel, the Gemara deals with the question, was the Torah given in Shivim Rishonis or only in Loshen Kodesh? And my nafkamina, Rashi writes the nafkamina is regarding Kriyas HaTorah. And Tosfos disagrees with Rashi, and Tosfos says, but Kriyas HaTorah is only mid'Rabbanan. So what would be the nafkamina in the Machlokes Gemara, whether Torah b'Shivim Loshen Nitno or b'Loshen HaKodesh? Tosfos says the nafkamina is only regarding Parsha Zachar And according to the Tosis Rabbeinu Peretz, Parshas Poro. Parshas Zocher is the only Kriya that's min HaTorah. Twice in Shulchan Aruch, Semakuf Me'avav and Dina Kriyas HaTorah, Semen Tofreish Pei Hey and Dina Dalet Parshiyos. Twice in Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch says, Parshas Poro is min HaTorah as well. That's a gewaldige chiddush. Why would Parshas Zocher be Kriya D'Oraisa? Parshas Poro. Parshas Zocher, it's a mitzvah saseh. Zocher is Hasha Osalacho Amalek. So some Rishonim feel that the Oifen HaZachira is Kriyas HaTorah. But why would Parshas Poro be min HaTorah? It's not what we will be discussing today, maybe at a future time. Minchas Osher Chumash Bamidbar Siman Nun Vav, there's a big discussion about this. But anyway, Rashi says, the nafkamin ragabe Kriyas HaTorah. Is Pshat in Rashi that Kriyas HaTorah is D'Oraisa? Well, that's what the Bach seems to say. And the Bach says, if Moshe Rabbeinu tikkun, that is D'Oraisa. However, there is another takona that Moshe Rabbeinu was metaken, and that's Yerushalmi in Ksubis Dav Beis, Shivas Yamei Avelis. And Afal Piken Kosav Rambam B'Hilchos Avel, Avelis is Midrabanan. So this Rambam, combined with the Yerushalmi in the beginning of Ksubis, proves that Takonas Moshe Rabbeinu was still a takona. Min HaTorah is only what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu. But Moshe Rabbeinu, like all the Chachamim Shabau Acharav, felt the responsibility to be goyz gzeres and metaken takonos. So the takona of Moshe Rabbeinu is still a takona, and it's not a D'Oraisa. So when the Bach comes to explain Rashi, nafka min ragabe Kriyas HaTorah, and the Ritva already in Megillah Daf Yud Zayin says, according to Rashi, Kriyas HaTorah is min HaTorah. So Minchas Osher, I don't even remember which siman it is. Some people remember Minchas Osher better than I do, and I constantly apologize because to me it's not Gersa de Yankuta. When I was young, the Sefer wasn't available, so I don't remember it that well. So some other Sfarim which I remember better. So Minchas Osher, there is 15 different levels between the Oraisa and the Rabbanon. Everybody knows there are the Oraisas and the Rabbonans. But I explained 15 different levels between the Oraisa and the Rabbanon. We have many sources. Dover HaMefurish b'Torah, Chomer Tvei Medover She'einoi Mefurish b'Torah, Ero Da'asya Midrosha. And then we have the concept of the Rabbanon Sheyesh L'Wikim min HaTorah. And Asmachta. The Ritvan Rosh Hashanah Daf Zayin says Asmachta has more weight than an other Rabbanon, Rotzen HaTorah. So obviously a takon of Moshe Rabbeinu carries more weight and more significance than a takon of Ravina Veravashi. So it is maybe closer to the Oraisa, because after all, you remember the last posuk in Divrei Hanavim, the last posuk in Malachi, Novi Malachi, Zichru Toiras Moshe Avdi Asher Tzavisi B'Chorev. So the Torah is called Toiras Moshe Avdi. That is what the Novi says. So the Takona of Moshe Rabbeinu, one would say is Korev L'Dioraisa, but it's still not the Oraisa Mamish. And that is why the Rambam maintains Avelis Darabonon, even though the Yerushalmi says Moshe was Matakan Avelis. So when Rashi says the nafka mina, whether Torah b'shivim Rosh Hashanah or b'Rosh Hashanah nafka mina l'gaba Kriyas HaTorah, shouldn't be a pele, even though Kriyas HaTorah is midrabanan, but it goes all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So fundamentally,
according to Yerushalmi, according to the Rambam, Shabbos reading and Sheni and Chamishi is all the same level. Yeah. And according to Yerushalmi, Sheni and Chamishi would be over less?
Yes, but even according to the Rambam and the Gemara Bavli, Sheni v'Chamishi, as we know it, is Takonas Ezra. Gimel Gavra and Asora Psukim, that is Takonas Ezra. So it is a lesser chiyuv. But Moshe Rabbeinu was matakan that there needs to be a kriya korshu, some kriya on Sheni v'Chamishi. Another reason that Rashi might maintain Kriyas HaTorah is Mediurais is because Chazal Darshan at the end of Megillah, Vayadaber Moshe es Moyad Hashem el B'nei Yisrael. And that is one of the sources of Kriyas HaTorah. Now, the fundamental question, which I understand you dealt with in this Yarchei Kallah, is it Choyves HaTzibur or Choyves HaYochid? Is every individual chayiv to hear Kriyas HaTorah? But the way to be mekayim this mitzvah, you need a minyan. Or is this mitzvah it is incumbent on the tzibur, Choyves HaTzibur and not Choyves HaYochid? And the nafkamina would be, how much effort does an individual need to go through to hear Kriyas HaTorah? If it's Choyves HaYochid, then it's upon you, and you need to do an effort. If it's Choyves HaTzibur, well, when I'm in Shiur, that's Choyves HaTzibur, but the individual doesn't need to do that much effort. So there's a similar Minchas Osher about davening with a minyan. Is it a chiyuv or not a chiyuv? Similar question. Reb Moshe, in Igros Moshe says it's a chiyuv gomer. And my conclusion was, it's not a chiyuv. The Lashon of Shulchan Aruch is yishtadel. The two writes yishtadel ma'oid, but it's still yishtadlus. And I do not want to belittle the importance of Tefillah B'tzibur. After all, our kavana is flawed. And Tefillah B'tzibur eina chozeres reikam la'oila miskabeles. So it definitely is important to daven with a minyan. But when we're dealing with halachic criteria, is it a chiyuv or not? So if it's a choyves HaTzibur, it's not really upon the individual. If it's a choyves HaYochid, everybody needs to try to be part, to have a minyan, to have the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah. So, Simen Kuf Mem Vav Siv Beis is a long and complicated seif. And there are many different opinions in the seif. Page 7 in our kit. Kiven shehitchel hakoira likrois b'sefer Torah, osa lasaper afilu b'divrei Torah, afilu ben gavra legavra. V'afilu im hishlemu parsha. You already did Shnai Mikrivei Targum. You must listen to Kriyas HaTorah, and you cannot do anything else. Yesh matirim ligrois belachash. Yesh matirim, you could learn different things, but belachash. Don't interfere with the Kriya. Yesh oimrim, shem yesh yudit saiti. If there are 10 other people listening to the Kriya, mutar asaper. Mutar asaper is even not belachash. V'yesh matirim misheterosei menosoi. ויש מתירים למי שקודם שנפתח ספר תורה מחזר פונה ואמר לעצמו שאינו רוצה לשמוע ספר תורה ריקס ומתחיל לקרוס. So, יש מתירים. How many different opinions do we have? מי שתרוסי הם נוסי. If a person turned around and, in a very obvious way, indicates to everyone, I have my own thing now and I'm not part of you. I don't need to listen to the Kriya. יש מתירים. If there are 10 people without him. So what is the fundamental question of this entire seif? If it's a choyves hayochid, then probably that would be v'hanochin, the right thing to do, and that is the last line in this seif. V'hanochin shebekol ha'parshos ra'ui lemedaktik b'dvorav lachav endatev v'lashamam mepi ha'koira. If it's a choyves hayochid, then there are no excuses. If it's a Choyves HaTzibur, then all the other opinions seem to make sense. If there are 10 people listening, then that's a tzibur. I am number 11. There's a tzibur anyway. If there are 10 people listening, or even if there are not 10 people listening, but if I am learning, I am entitled to learn. Is this a fundamental question? Not necessarily. I think according to both approaches, we could understand the various different opinions. Even if it's Choyves HaTzibur, but if you're in Shiur, you're part of that tzibur. You're part of the tzibur. And therefore, you need to listen. So even the Das HaMachmirim could be very well appreciated even if it's a chayvus tzibur. If you're home, you don't need to make a great effort to come to Shiur because you're a yochid. But if you're in Shiur, you're part of the tzibur. And as part of the tzibur, you need to listen. Because if every individual will do his own thing, then there is no tzibur. A tzibur is always composed of individuals.
So that's part of the hanachan? Could be this also?
Yes, yes. And on the other hand, even if we say it's a chayvus hayochid, but how big is chayvus hayochid? One could still argue, I'm learning Torah. So it is a chayvus hayochid, but if I'm learning Torah, if Torah nosai, maybe it's just as important. I don't need to listen. So I think, according to both fundamental understandings, we could understand the various different opinions. And maybe, many times I teach my Talmidim and Kollalim that I teach in the yeshivas, we were taught, and that is the tendency of B'nai Torah Ba'asher Hem. Whenever we find a machloikus, whether in the Gemara or in the Poskim, or a suffix in the Gemara or in the Poskim, we tend to explain that the machloikus is in the yesodus of the sugya, in the fundamentals. But I think that's wrong. The vast majority of pluktas and sfeikis are nuanced, are in the little details, and not necessarily on the fundamental concepts of the sugya. What I mean to say is, when we have this sif that we just learned, and some opinions say you need to listen to Kriyas HaTorah, no excuses. And on the other hand, we have a few opinions in Shulchan Aruch which seem to be very lenient. If there are 10 people without me, I can do whatever I want. If I prove that I turned in the other direction and I say, I can learn whatever I want. I'm a big masmid, I don't need to listen. So it would be natural to say that the question is it chayvus hayochid or chayvus hatzibur? But there's no necessity to say that. And you say, even if it's chayvus hatzibur, once you're part of the tzibur, you need to listen to Kriyas HaTorah. On the other hand, one could argue it's a chayvus hayochid, but this chayva is not such a gevaldige chayva. And if I'm learning im Torah nosai, I could learn my thing. After all, it's all about Gimel Yom B'li Torah. That was the fundamental takana. So if you're not doing anything better, listen to Kriyas HaTorah, but you're entitled to learn something else. So these different opinions do not necessarily depend how we define the fundamental mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah. And the different opinions are nuanced, are in the details. And that is my approach in most sugyas in halacha. And the easiest way, and the most appealing way, is all about lamdis. So when you have a machlokes, our tendency is to say that the machlokes is in the Hagdorah, in the fundamental definitions of a mitzvah. But after learning a lot of Torah and a lot of poskim, I think that most of the pluktas and most of the sveikis are in the little details and in the nuances of a sugya and lav dafka and the fundamentals. And I think this applies to our sugya as well. So we continue in our quest. What are the sources? Is Kriyas HaTorah chayvus hayochid or chayvus hatzibur? But before we go on, the Prima Godim asks a fundamental question on the Gemara, on the basic sugya. Gimel yomim b'li Torah. Amdu neviim shebeneim v'tiknu sheyeh koyrem b'Torah. But twice a day we say Kriyas Shema. Isn't that Torah? Twice a day we say Kriyas Shema. And twice in Shas, in Adoram Dav Chesed Amud Aleph, Menachos Tzadik Tes Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Afilu lo koreh le Kriyas Shema Shachas V'Avos, he was Makayim the mitzvah of Ogiso B'Yomam V'Layla. So what's the big issue of Gimel Yomim B'li Torah? Prima Godim asks this question of Kuf Lamedei, and he gives two terutzim, and both to me seem to be a gevaldige doichik. One teretz is, Nevi'im Shebeneim said, we can't have Gimel Yomim B'li Torah b'chsav. Kriyas Shema doesn't need to be b'toich haksav. Kriyas Shema you could say Baal Peh. Kriyas HaTorah needs to be b'toich haksav. Why is it that important to have Kriya b'toich haksav? Why is that important? Torah is Torah. The other teretz of the Pri Megadim is Talmud Torah be'iyun. But Kriyas HaTorah is not be'iyun. Kriyas HaTorah is like Kriyas Shema. This is Kriya and that's Kriya. And to me, it's a pel on the Pri Megadim. The answer to this question is so simple, and it's Mefurish in Rambam. Let's go back to the Rambam. The Rambam says, Gimel Yomim Beli Torah Berabim. And that's Mefurish in Rambam. So I don't think this question at all is a question. Moshe Rabbeinu tikkun lem liyisrael sheyeh koydem b'Torah berabim b'Shabbat sheni v'chamishi kedei shelo yeshu gimel yomim b'li shmiyas Torah. It is all about Talmud Torah berabim, and that was the takana of Moshe Rabbeinu. Choves hayochid or choves hatzibur. I just spoke about Pshat and Lamdis. So let's have a little drop of Lamdis, and that's the Birchas Shmuel in Yevamah Simach Chof Aleph, page number 7. Yes.
Was that there shouldn't be 3 days without Limud HaTorah. Who cares if it's Barabim or not Barabim?
Oh, Talmud Torah Derabim is of such extreme importance, and Chazal and many sources speak about Talmud Torah Berabim. I think.
So where does the Rambam get that deal? That's that around.
I think the Rambam gets a dig from the Pri Megadim's kasha, because otherwise it would be a pella. They're not going 3 yomim b'li Torah. They had the mitzvah d'oraisa from day number 1, Kriyas Shema Shachris V'Haris. And Talmud Torah Derabim is so important. It is what Talmud Torah B'Yeshiva is all about. And that is Talmud Torah Berabim. Talmud Torah is a community endeavor, and not only is an individual mitzvah.
So that could be Baal Peh, because they had Sifrei Torah in the Midbar when Moshe was metaken.
Once again, Kriyas HaTorah needs to be Kriya Metoich HaKsav. Not always does the fundamental idea explain all the details. And this is part of what I mentioned just a few minutes ago. Details are details, fundamentals are fundamentals, and they were metaken Kriyas HaTorah. Kriyas HaTorah needs to be Metoich HaKsav. But I think it's unreasonable to say that it was all about Kriya Metoich HaKsav. But if it was all about Talmud Torah Berabim, I think that makes more sense. So the Birchas Shmuel, that was Reb Baruch Ber, one of the greatest Talmidim of Reb Chaim Brisker. I had a close relationship with Reb Yankov Kamenetsky, and I saw that as a great privilege. And I heard some fascinating comments from Reb Yankov Kamenetsky, which I don't think were ever printed in his name. Maybe they are too problematic. So Reb Yankov, he was one of the Ziknei HaDor, and when he spoke about Gedolim of previous generations, it was almost like he's talking about his Chavedim. And Reb Yankov Kamenetsky once commented in a private conversation that he think the Torah world lost a lot because Reb Baruch Ber saw himself as an interpreter of Reb Chaim Brisker. Reb Yankov said he was such a Bar Kishlan and such a Goen. If he would be more independent in his learning, we would have more out of him. But because Reb Baruch Ber was such a chassid of his Rebbe, of Reb Chaim, and all his go'iness was just to understand and to explain Reb Chaim Brisker, we paid the price. That's what Reb Yankov Kamenetsky argued. Well, an interesting comment. I'm just quoting what I heard from Reb Yankov anyway. So Reb Baruch Ber says, the nafka between Choves HaYochid and Choves HaTzibur, do we say Ruboi Kekuloi? So B'Chazor Seshatz, if you have 6 mispalalim, you could say Kaddish and Kedusha. You need another 4 people that are mitzdaref, even though they're not part of the minyan, they're not davening. Would we say the same regarding Kriyas HaTorah? If you have 6 people that did not hear Kriyas HaTorah yet, and 4 other people are mitzdaref, they already heard the Kriya, but were willing to, to be part of the minyan. And Reb Baruch Ber says, if it's a Choves HaYochid, we could say Ruboi Kekuloi. If it's a Choves HaTzibur, we cannot say Ruboi Kekuloi. And this brings us to the fundamental sugya of Ruboi Kekuloi, which is a fascinating sugya, which I don't think we have the time to get into the details. But what Rabbi Ber discusses is a suffix of the Chaya Odom. The Chaya Odom is mesupik, whether the din that we have in Tefillah would apply to Kriyas HaTorah as well. Page number 10. Sif Yud Aleph, in page number 10. Tzorech Iyun. Im kulam shamu Kriyas HaTorah, v'yesh eze b'nei Odom shelo shamu, emutar likrois oid apam b'shvilam. Interesting nusach. Eze b'nei Odom shelo shamu. How many? ולא ידומה לפריס השמה, דהוסם כל יוחד מחויב ויסה ברוכה. אבל לא החיוב רק שיש מקייס התורה, וכך הם תקנו שיבוך בשם כהד הציבור. יש לו מדולוי תקנו אלא כשכל הציבור חיוב בקריאה. אבל לא בשביל יוחיד, וצורך עיון. So the Chaim Bodom is mesupik. And the way he formulates the suffix, if it's chavis hatzibur, then you need a tzibur that's mechuyev. You need 10 people. If you don't have a tzibur that's mechuyev, then, but if it's chavis hayochid, then a yochid just needs a tzibur to fulfill his obligation. So maybe we could do it for yichidim. Even for 1 or 2 people, that's unlikely. Probably he means 6, like davening, but he doesn't say so. Judging the lashon of the Chayodam, he seems to say, even if there are 1 or 2 people that didn't hear the Kriya, we could do the Kriya for those individuals. But by Tefillah B'tzibur, the original Tefillah B'tzibur, the Chazor Sashatz, he was moitzi others. No longer in our days. And the Rambam and the Tur write it's just Minhag Aviseinu B'Yodenu. But originally, Chazor Sashatz was, Kaddish and Kiddush was be moitzi the others. But we need 6. So the Chaya Adam is mesupik. And the Baruch Ber says, if it's a chovis hayochid, we could understand that if there are 6 yechidim, then the others could be mitzdaref. If it's a chovis a tzibur, you need a tzibur that wasn't Makayim the mitzvah. The Bialoch and Simakuf Mem Gimel doesn't quote the Berchas Shmuel for a very simple reason. He was older than a Baruch Ber, and it's a different Derech HaLimud. I doubt he would quote him even if the Berchas Shmuel would be available. But the Bialocha quotes the Ran and other Rishonim that you could do Kriyas HaTorah if you have 6 people that are Mechuyev. So this L'chayre would prove that it's a Chovis Hayochid, and that's the suffix of the Chaya Odom. If it's a Chovis Hayochid, you could do Kriyas HaTorah even for Yechidim, because all you need for those Yechidim to be Makayim their mitzvah is to have a minyan. But if it's a Chovis HaTzibur, maybe you need 10 people that are Mechuyev. And once again, I doubt this Savora. And I think even if it's a Chovis HaTzibur, maybe we would say Ruboy Kekuloi, and if you have a Rav of a Tzibur, maybe that would be enough to do Kriyas HaTorah. So this machlokes between the Chayodim and the Mishnah Brura, contrary to what the Berchas Shmuel says, once again, is not necessarily dependent, is a Chovis HaTzibur, even if he says a Chovis HaTzibur, but maybe die Berov HaTzibur. Chazor Sashatz is a Chovis HaTzibur, especially when Yechidim davened, and Afar Piken 6 is enough. Even though it definitely Bisman Hazeh is Chovis HaTzibur and not Chovis HaYochid, and 6 is enough. So once again, this machlokes does not necessarily prove Chovis HaYochid or Chovis HaTzibur. And that is why I just want to bring our final makoides to say why I think Kriyas HaTorah is Chovis HaTzibur and not Chovis HaYochid. The Rif in the beginning of Megillah Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, I don't think we have it in our packet, but the Rif in Megillah Daf Amud Aleph says, Megillah Shaloi Bizmano, Tzorech HaTzorah. Bizmano means Yud Aleph Tezvav, you don't need a minyan. Megillah in our case be Yud Gimel. Yud Aleph Tezvav, and Shaloi Bizmano, you need a minyan. And the Ramban asks, if so, why is Mikra Megillah not in the Mishnah and Megillah Daf Chof? Megillah Daf Chof, the Gemara says, Kriyas HaTorah, Bechas Koyanim, Kedusha, need a minyan. So why in that very same Mishnah doesn't the Mishnah say that Kriyas HaTorah needs a minyan? And the Ramban answers, the Mishnah Megillah only deals with things that are Chovis HaYochid, but you need a minyan. Masha Ein Kain, Kriyas HaTorah is Chovis HaTzibur, and that is not included in the Mishnah. Beches Koyanim is Chovis HaYochid, but you can't do Beches Koyanim without 10 people. No, lehefech. The Ramban says, the Mishnah deals with Chovis HaTzibur. Mikra Megillah is Chovis HaYochid, but the Yochid needs a minyan. But in the Mishnah, we have Kriyas HaTorah, Beches Koyanim, and Tefillah B'Tzibur. These three mitzvahs are Chovis HaYochid, Chovis HaTzibur. Masha Enken, Mikra Megillah, even Shelo B'Zmana, is Chovis HaYochid, but the Yochid needs a minyan for Persumei Nisa. So it is clear in the Ramban, beginning of Megillah, that Kriyas HaTorah is Chovis HaTzibur, like Chazos HaShatz, and like Berchas Koyanim. So a Yochid doesn't have a chiyuv to come to Berchas Koyanim. It is Chovis HaTzibur. So the Ramban clearly explaining the Rif says the common denominator between Kriyas HaTorah, Chazos HaShatz, and Berchas Koyanim, these are Chovis HaTzibur. And that is why they are in the Mishnah, in Masechet Megillah, Masha Enkein, Kriyas Megillah. Chov Daled Amud Beis, in Masechet Megillah, page 11. The Mishnah says, a cotton koyre b'Torah, einoi poires al hashama. He could lay in the Torah, einoi poires al hashama. Kosev Rashi, einoi poires al hashama, lefi shubo lahoitzi rabim yedei chayvoson. Kiven she'enem mechuyev b'dover, eini moitzi rabim yedei chayvoson. So how could he be koyre b'Torah? Obviously, Kriyas HaTorah, he's not moitzi rabim yedei chayvoson, because it's Chovis HaTzibur. And therefore, tzibur needs to lane. If a cotton lanes, the tzibur's laning. Einoi tzorach lahoitzi acherem yedei chayvoson. Poiras al Shema, moitzi acherim yedei chayvoson. Oiva lefnei hatevo, moitzi acherim yedei chayvoson. And a cotton can't do that. But he could be koyre b'Torah, because the koyre b'Torah einoi tzorach lahoitzi rabim yedei chayvoson. Once again, this proves Kriyas HaTorah is Chovis HaTzibur. I think these two rayas are the fundamental and the most convincing rayas that Kriyas HaTorah is Chovis HaTzibur. Moed Koten Chov Beis Amud Beis. And this is the last source that we have in our package. So Nosi Shemeis, when a Nosi passes away, all the Botei Medrash are closed, and we expect all the Talmidei Chachamim to be oisik behesped. At the bottom of the page, Chochem Shemeis, Beis Midrash Botel, Av Beis Shemeis, Kol Midrash Even B'Teilim. Nosi Shemeis, Botei Midrash's Kolon B'Teilim. O B'nei HaKnesses Nachnusan LeBeis HaKnesses. Oh, this is silly. A few words are missing. Nachnusan LeBeis HaKnesses V'koirin Shiva V'yoitzim. Both the medrash are bottled. The yeshivas are closed. However, both the knesios, they come together Shabbos, koirin Shiva V'yoitzim. What does this prove? Chovis HaTzibur, Chovis HaYochid. They don't daven with minyan. Everybody davens at home. But they do come together for Kriyas HaTorah v'yotzim. L'cha'ira, we would say, this is Chovis HaTzibur, and the Avelis and the Nosi is not Mevatel Chovis HaTzibur. The individuals don't come to Shiur, but this is Chovis HaTzibur. But the Ritva seems to explain the halacha differently. And that is the last page, 13. Bei HaKnesses nechnusen lebeis HaKnesses, kloimer, haragilim nispalel bebeis HaKnesses, mishanim es makoinam, boiker ve'erev, kishem nechnusen nispalel. V'yafal pi shavele mein sham, ele mispalel bebeisam, gabe nosi omri, she'im mispalel bebeis HaKnesses klal, ele biyoim mishabe shenechnusen likros b'torah shiva, kedei shelo yehei beis HaKnesses bota legamre, af mekriyas HaTorah b'tzibur. So the Ritva explains once again, pshat, not lamdas, practical halacha, and not fundamental haggadoros. Shelo yehei beis HaKnesses botel legamre, it's a takona. And the takona is what you do b'tzibur, Talmud Torah b'tzibur, shelo yehei beis HaKnesses botel legamre, Chazal more metaken, come to shul, do Kriyas HaTorah. You could daven at home, but there is no Kriyas HaTorah at home. And this does not prove it's a Chovis HaTzibur. So as I said before, Rav Torah is nuances and pshat and dakus and details, and not only fundamental haggadoros. So the Ritva explains, if you don't have a minyan and everybody davens at home and you don't learn together in shul, so why Kriyas HaTorah is different? Is it because it's Chovis HaTzibur, a different haggadah? Doesn't seem to on the Ritva. Kedei shelo yehei beis HaKnesses botel legamre af mekriya b'Torah b'tzibur, and that is why Chachamim were metaken that come together for Kriyas HaTorah, then go home and daven. So let me finish today's shiur with a story, because people love stories. Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik was a son-in-law of Reb Rafal Shapira. Reb Rafal Shapira was a son-in-law of the Netziv. Reb Chaim was almost as old as his Shaver. His Shaver was just a few years older than him, because in Lithuania, Alter Rebuchim were learned in the yeshivas. And the story goes that Reb Chaim lived in the same building as his Shaver. Reb Chaim lived in the ground floor. Reb Rafal Shapira lived one story on top of Reb Chaim. And we don't know why, whether Reb Chaim was ill or wasn't feeling well, and he organized a minyan for Kriyas HaTorah in his house. And there was a tzeinter missing, and he asked the Shver to come down to be metzara for a minyan for Kriyas HaTorah, and the Shver said, no, I'm in the middle of learning, don't bother me. And he didn't come down. Was he such a shver? Was he such a nasty shver? Why? And so the Yoidadova says he wanted to tell Reb Chaim, it's Chovis HaTzibur and Haknish Kop. Don't be such a frummer. If you can't go to shul, you're put from Kriyas HaTorah, and you have no chiyuv to arrange a minyan at home. And that's why the Rafal Shapira, I'm sure he was proud of his son-in-law. How could you not be proud of such a Gavaldig son-in-law? And I'm sure that he loved him. But he wanted to convey a message, lahalacha. Kriyas HaTzibur is Chovis HaTzibur. And if you're at home, then you're potter. You don't need to be matriach people to come to your house to do Kriyas HaTorah. So the Rafal Shapira did not come down. What did they do? I don't know. I wasn't there. Maybe they dragged someone off the street, and I don't know. But that's the way the story goes. So Reb Chaim, as we know, was a Gevaldige Medaktik Ba'alocha, and also a Gevaldige Yerei Shamayim. We know the stories of the Brisker Rav, and it came from Beis Aviv. But this is an interesting story, and the reason that Rafal Shapira was also one of the Gedolei Ador, and his sefer is called Torah Safol, and he didn't come down because he felt that there is no chiyuv to be matriach people to organize a minyan in your house, because Kriyas HaTorah is Chovis HaTzibur and it's not Chovis HaYochid. But nevertheless, it is important. And as I said in the beginning of the shiur regarding Tefillah B'tzibur, maybe it's not a chiyuv al pi halacha, contrary to the Igros Moshe, but it is important. And a good Jew does many things that he is not necessarily obliged to do. We do many things because we want to do them. We do many things because they're important. Tefillah b'tzibur is important. It's very important because we want our tefillahs to have an effect. We want the Kodesh Baruch Hu to respond to our tefillahs. And the only way to guarantee that a Kodesh Baruch Hu will respond to your tefillahs is Tefillah b'tzibur. She'ena chazeres leikam, and the Rambam writes, Tefillah b'tzibur la'olam miskabelas. So thank you for coming to the Somayach Yarchei Kallah, and it's always a pleasure.
The Kriyas have to be part of davening. The Tzibur has a minion for Shachar in the middle of nowhere, and then they don't really have their Sefer Torah. Elaine?
You have a minyan?
They have a minion, but they don't have a Sefer Torah with them.
They don't have a Sefer Torah?
In the afternoon, they'll be by a Sefer Torah.
So what's the question? Whether they need to go and lane?
Is Elaine part of davening?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I have a neighbor who's an elderly man. He has a hard time walking.
Do you know Rabbi Yitzchak? Are you part of the Yarchei Kallah? And you give a shiur here?
Just today.
What?
Just today.
Uh-huh. He's a very chashuv Talmid Chacham, this young man. One of the great Marbitzei Torah in Yerushalayim, a dear friend. Yes?
So he can't walk very well. He has a hard time walking. So he does the Yechidus all the time. So I was wondering if it was to die maybe like once a week, even like Kabbalah Shabbos or something, to try and make a minion there. But I think so.
Definitely. He can't make it to shul.
No, I mean sometimes he goes in a wheelchair. But,
It would be a tremendous chesed, at least from time to time, to have a minyan in his house.
so it's okay.
Definitely.
Kriyas HaTorah versus davening is different.
If you make the effort to have a minyan in his house, let's do Kriyas HaTorah as well.
Seems not to be connection.
What?
And to take the minyan from shul and go to the house?
What?
To take the minyan from shul and go to his house? Yeah.
There are two dinim. Davening with a minyan and also davening in a shul. Because the Gemara in the beginning of Bracha says, Tfilosai shalodem nishmas bebeis HaKnesses. And that Tzlach makes a big point of this, that even if you daven b'yechidus, it's preferable to daven in a shul than at home. Even if it's b'yechidus. Davening in a shul. No, a shul is a mokum kibbutz rabim, where rabim is misparal. The fact that this is a mokum tefillah rabim gives it added value. So the Tzlach says, even if you daven b'yechidus, it's preferable to daven in shul. What would be better, a minyan at home or yechidus in shul? Definitely a minyan at home, because the mala of a minyan is more important than the mala of a shul. So there are different levels. Davening with a minyan is number one. Davening in a shul is important. Bizman shatzibu mispalarim. You daven b'yechidus. Now the big question is, what do you mean bizman shatzibu mispalarim? Somewhere out there, there's always a tzibu mispalarim. You could daven shachris 1:30 in the afternoon. It'll still be bizman shatzibu mispalarim. The question is which tzibu. You could have mincha 9:30 by night, and Satmar Chasidim is going to be Bezman Shatziba Mispalalim. I think Bezman Shatziba Mispalalim means a tzibah that you are part of, a tzibah that you know. The shul you usually daven together with them. That is my understanding, because otherwise, from Alois Shachar till Sof Zman Tefillah is always Zman Shatziba Mispalalim. There are always some people that have a heter to daven be'alois shachar. Yoitzer Derech. And so my understanding, Mizman Shatzim Espalel, is HaTzibur, your tzibur. The shul you usually daven with. If you know when they daven, and for some reason you cannot go there, you need to daven at home, that is Mizman Shatzibur Mispalel.